Okay, this is all you need to make French bread. Some kind of mixer with a hook attachment is important. Bread flour, I like King Arthur. Any bread flour is fine. You can use all-purpose flour, but the protein or gluten is the important part, and King Arthur typically has a lot. Yeast, I like the rapid rise. It cuts your time in half, but any kind of yeast is fine. And salt, and of course, water. And that's it. Oh, and this book I use, this is the recipe, and this is the book. The recipe is on page 253. It's called A Daily Loaf. Of course, it's in French, however you say that. One thing I forgot, for the first part of the recipe, you got to use the paddle. Oh, by the way, I'm going to be making a half of a recipe. My mixer is only 4 quarts, and if I make a whole recipe or a whole batch, it really has a hard time, so I just cut it in half. So everything you see will be a half a recipe. You still get 2 baguettes out of it, so it's pretty good. You want the hot water to be about 120 to 130, and this is 130. You want to be as precise as possible, although the only reason I'm doing the temperature is because I've got this instant-read thermometer, but it's not that necessary. But super hot water out of your tap is probably fine. And also, I beat the yeast in a little bit so that it's not directly hit by the hot water before I put the water in. Also notice that you're not putting salt in yet. Typically, you don't want to put salt and yeast in right at the same time. It'll kill the yeast. So now you mix this thing for 10 minutes. I get it going, just kind of keep an eye on it so that it doesn't crawl all the way up the beater. When I'm mixing the water and salt, I'm doing a half a batch, so it's 1 teaspoon of water and 1 teaspoon of salt. It's kind of ridiculous. I use the hot water and I try to mix the salt in, depending on how much I think I got actually in the bowl and was left in the little, whatever you call these things. Then I may add a sprinkle more of salt. The salt is super important because without it, the bread just isn't going to hold together. So I've got less than 5 minutes left, and it's still not climbing the sides, and I'm beating the heck out of it. So sometimes this will happen depending on the moisture in the air. Today's kind of muggy. Well, now it's starting to come off, but it may or may not act exactly the way the book describes, although it looks like now mine's going to come off. So you may end up having to add a little flour here and there. Typically, it's better to have to add flour than to add water. Well, shoot, there it goes. When it's beaten like this, if I can, I'll let it keep beating. The more it beats, the better the protein will form and the better rise you'll get. I kind of have to keep my hand on the mixer to keep it from riding away. But it just depends on your mixer. You may have to slow it down a little bit, but so far I'm okay. And remember, I'm only doing half a batch. If this was a full batch, this wouldn't work at all. So now I've turned it down some. I'm going to add the salt water. You'll see there's a ton of salt. I'm going to try and scrape it out with a spoon, but we'll see. I might add just a tiny pinch of salt. Okay, so now the 10 minutes is up, and you can see how loose this thing is. But remember, I've only added half the... Sorry, I'm jiggling the camera, but I've only added half of the flour. But I'm going to switch to the hook now. But if you pull on it, you should feel definite resistance. It's mushy and all that, but you could tell where it's starting to come together. So put the hook on, and we'll go from there. The book says to add flour a 1/4 cup at a time, and the way I do that, because I just forget. sometimes, and that can be disastrous. Every time I add a 1/4 cup, I'll mark it through. So I started with 1.5 cups, so this will finish off the 1/2 cup, and then I've got 1 more cup to go to make it 3. And I just put a little mark as I go along. It's silly, but it's effective, and it keeps me from doing the 1 in 10 stupid thing that ruins the bread because I guess wrong. Before you add the next 1/4 cup, you want to get it about like this. You don't really see dry flour on the bottom, then you can add it. Also at this point, if you've got a guard that will go around to keep the flour from splashing out, this might be a good time to add it. Also, as I'm mixing, I will turn the hook up as much as the mixer will stand it. It's getting tougher, but you want to beat this dough. If you have arms like Popeye, you can do it by hand, but no thank you. Sometimes it'll start to look kind of dry. If that's the case, then just stop the mixer and feel it, you know, and see what you think. Like right now, mine's looking kind of dry. It's getting close. I've got 2 more 1/4 cups to go, so I've got a 1/2 cup to add. I don't know. I'm gonna beat it some and see. This is where moisture in the air can really make a difference. I doubt that it's gonna make a 1/2 cup's worth of difference, but sometimes you really gotta just play it by ear. I've still got a 1/4 cup to go, but I'm gonna add a little bit of water. I think sometimes, you know, just cutting the recipe in half changes things, and then the weather, whether it's muggy. If it's a dry day, you may have to add some water. This is weird since it's muggy. Usually it's wetter than it should be, but you know, you never know. So anyway, I'm gonna add just a tiny bit. What I would recommend is if the first time you make it, don't change anything. And if it feels too wet, don't add anything, definitely, because too wet is, you can still work with that. Just make sure you did add your salt. If it's too dry, I'd wait till the end and then add a little bit if you need it. But anyway, you'll see coming up how it's supposed to look. So I'm just adding a tiny bit of water. You can see there on the bottom. Just a little bit, just to wet it, and then we'll see how it does. So after adding the water, it came together. It's still not ready. You see how it rips? It still sticks to my fingers, which is good, but it's definitely in a solid mass. And I'm still a 1/4 cup, well, I didn't make my last mark, but I'm still a 1/4 cup short. I'm just gonna leave it out. I'm not gonna add that last 1/4 cup. But you can see my thumb comes away dry when I touch this. So I think it's good enough. Now I'm gonna keep beating it until I can see what's called a window pane. And hopefully I'll show you that here in a few minutes. With this small mixer, sometimes it can be hard to get to that point, but we'll get as close as we can. This is when, if you got a smaller mixer like mine, you really gotta keep your hand on it. If you take it off, it'll start walking away from you. Now it's broken up into a couple of pieces in the bowl right now, but when it reforms into one mass, it'll slap that mixer all over the counter. Okay, so I went the 10 minutes on the kneading, and the dough feels pretty good. It should, you should be able to come away with your fingers almost dry. It'll stick a little bit, but not too much, you see. So what I'm gonna do is show you the window pane. This one, I don't think it quite goes to a window pane, but you take a piece of dough like this, and then you slowly pull it like you're gonna make pizza out of it. And you pull it apart and make it thinner and thinner. And then the idea is that you get so thin and it stays together that it forms, it's doing pretty good. It forms almost a window pane. It becomes translucent. And I think you can see that there, that the dough becomes translucent. I like it to be super smooth, but honestly, you know, with my mixer, I'm not going to get it there without dang near breaking the mixer. So it's not worth it, and it's not an exact science anyway. But you can see the dough it's wet still. You see my finger? But you know, my whole hand, I had it with my whole hand, and mostly my hand comes away dry. But you can see that it's a ball. You know what I mean? So we're going to work it a little more on the table now. So I'm going to try this on the counter. You could do this straight on the countertop. I've got a big wooden cutting board. I don't use it for cutting mostly. I just mostly use it to make bread. If you need flour on the board, then put it there. But mine, a good way to tell that you've got good dough is after a few minutes of it sitting, it feels smooth like a baby's butt. You know, and you want to slap it, kind of beat it up some, and pull it apart, and then slap it down, and do that a few times. That helps it to form good pockets for rising. And then once you have it in a ball, this is sort of hard to explain. Some people just do it by turning the dough underneath itself. The right way to do it is with the heel of your hand, you push on the dough and sort of come around. So without the dough in place, this is kind of what I'm doing, right? And the dough catches itself underneath in the front, and it pulls back toward itself, and it gets tighter. So what you're doing is you're tightening the dough by sort of pulling the dough underneath itself as you push forward with the heel of your hand, okay? And then once you've done this a few times, then it looks like a nice ball, and it's very tight. You can see, I think you can see that the dough is really tight and it's smooth, and now it's ready for its first rising. I might actually do this a little more, but you get the idea. Now it's good. So now you want to grease a big bowl. I don't know how many quarts this is, but it's a big bowl. I use, you know, whatever we have. My wife likes this stuff, so, but you can use butter or, you know, anything like that. And then just plop the dough. You've already kneaded the dough, so just plop it down in the bottom of the bowl, and then cover it with plastic wrap. So now that you've let it sit, based on the directions, you want to let it sit for 2 hours. However, if you use that fast rising yeast, only let it go for an hour. So we'll take a look at it in an hour. Okay, when the first rising is done, you know, it's going to be bigger. And the book tells you what to do. You take this out and you punch it down, you know, flatten it out, and then you roll it again, or you knead it again. I'll show you. Let me set it up so I can show you. So I just take it just like I did before. I'm doing this with the heel of my hand. All the work is in the heel. You're pushing the dough forward, tightening it up. And now it's going to be real nice and smooth when it gets done. I mean, it might have been a baby's butt before, but now it's definitely, you see, I don't know if that's easy to see, but anyway, it's ready to roll. So you just drop it back in. It says use wax paper. I don't have any handy, so I'm just gonna loosely cover it with the plastic wrap. I'm out of wax paper. So the whole idea is just to kind of cover it a little, but still let some air through. And then since I'm doing the fast rising, the second rising It says an hour and a half, but we'll go 45 minutes. Okay, so now the second rising's done. So now it's time to shape the dough and put it, if you've got a French bread pan, it's better. I'll put some pictures of them in this so you can see, but I threw all that stuff, I didn't throw it away. I gave it away or sold it before we moved here. So I use this pan. Again, this isn't ideal, but it'll work. During the second rising, I set the temperature to 450, and I put a pan in the bottom, on the very bottom of the oven. Mine's a gas oven, so that bottom is real hot. And we're gonna put water in there to make steam in a little while. But for now, we're just gonna shape the dough and put it on this pan. I'm gonna grease the pan and put some cornmeal on it. You don't have to do the cornmeal thing, and honestly, the cornmeal I have isn't really the kind you want to use. I put it on there anyway, but if you've got that coarse yellow cornmeal, that's sort of the traditional thing, but again, it's not that big a deal. You don't need it. Okay, so I've got the bread dough on the counter. It says to use a little flour. I don't do that. It's not going to stick. I mean, but if yours is real sticky, then do that. But what I'm going to do is use this little spatula, or you can use a knife or whatever, but I've got these plastic scrapers, and I'll just cut it in half. Now you can cut them into fours and make rounds. You can make one big loaf, whatever you want to do. I've always done baguettes, and remember, I did a half a batch, so I'm going to do 2 of them. Mine aren't going to be as long as what they talk about in the book, but whatever, it's good. So I put one piece aside, and I've got another piece, and you can see it's still kind of just shaped like half a circle, like it was in the bowl before I cut it. And I take it and I sort of bang it on the counter and pull. And you want an even pull so that you don't have like thin spots in the dough. You want to kind of be careful how you stretch it out so that the dough is all stretched evenly, so you don't have some weird shape later. And now what I'm doing is just straightening it out so it becomes sort of a really long rectangle. And depending on how long you want it, you just kind of keep pulling and shaping. And I'll show you an above view so you can see what it looks like. All right. It's not perfect, but you want to get it kind of close to being even. It all tastes good though, It's just if it's too uneven, then it'll bake unevenly. All right, so here's what it looks like from above. And I don't know how long that is, but let me see if I can find something to measure it with. Here's something you can, here's a standard size plastic wrap thing. I stretched it a little longer than that. But again, it doesn't matter that much as long as it gets in the shape you want. But obviously this is not a baguette yet. So what do we do now? Okay, I think this will work. Hopefully it does. If not, I can show you on the next one. But once you have it ready, then what you want to do is start at one end. And if you've ever made cinnamon rolls, it's just like doing that. And you want to roll it in on itself. And I kind of tighten it up when I do that. You don't want to tighten it too much. But you just roll from end to end, back and forth, until you get, sort of a shape of a baguette. And you can tell now if you've got one piece thicker than the other. Like you can see down here, this piece is thinner than this, so I'll have to fix that. But then once you've rolled it up, then pinch your ends together like this, and then you kind of take the baguette itself and sort of, you know, it's resilient dough, so you can still sort of shape it a little to get it where you want it. Dadgummit. Well, it'll be all right. So now I'm going to put this on the pan, and I'll show you what I do. All right, so I've got them both on there. One thing I forgot to show you, typically you will point the ends of a baguette, so just sort of roll it down to a point. It's all aesthetic, so it doesn't really matter. I didn't do it with the first one, but I went ahead and did it with the second one. It's totally up to you what you want to do. It's probably more practical not to do that because the little end piece ends up being smaller, but anyway, whichever. Now we're supposed to leave it for an hour. Sometimes with this one, well, I'm just going to leave it 30 minutes. I used to leave it at about 45 or an hour, and just to see more rise out of it. But I think we'll get a better pop in the oven if we just go a half an hour. So I'll see you in a half an hour. In the meantime, get you an egg and beat it. We'll put egg wash on this before we cut it. Okay, I just realized I thought I was recording the whole time, and so I put the egg wash on without actually recording, and I went to shut it off and took a picture. So anyway, sorry about that. You want to use just a whole egg. Don't put any water in it, and then brush the egg wash on. Make sure you get the sides and everything. It's going to help make the bread nice and brown, and it can help with the crust too. So now we're going to slice the bread. I've got this fancy pantsed bread lame. It just basically means, I think lame is like knife or something in French, but anyway, it's this razor blade thing, and it is really good. You don't have to use it, but it's tough to cut this dough the way we're going to cut it without using a razor blade. So it only costs about $13 or $15 to get one, and this is a good one. So let me switch hands and I'll show you how I cut. Okay, so you can see there's a razor blade on this thing. That's all it is a stick with a razor blade on it. And it's kind of hard to cut and hold this thing too, but what I do is I make 4 diagonal cuts down this thing. So we go 1, 2, 3, 4, okay? Really, yeah, it's cutting pretty good. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, if the bread turns out right, it should look like these cuts just explode and the bread comes out of them. So, knock on wood, we'll see what happens. All right, on to the oven. So, the book says do this 5 minutes before you bake, but I don't like to do that because the steam, every time you open the oven, the steam goes away more. So it says use 1 cup. I'm gonna put as much as it'll hold. It's hot water, and we're gonna put it in that pan at the bottom of the oven. So I'm gonna open this up, and then you'll see why in a minute. All right, you get all that steam, and then you put your bread in there, and you're off and running. All right, so I'm gonna set it on my clock, on my phone, but I'm gonna set it for about 30 minutes. The reason that hang on, you should be able to see my pretty face. The reason that the steam is important is because it helps make the crust. And what happens is that steam gets into the bread, and the bread is all puffed up because there's air in those little holes that it creates with the gluten. and the water gets in there and it collapses some of those on the outside of the bread so that there's a thicker piece of dough on the outside. And then that bread bakes, it bakes the water out of it, and now it's a nice thicker piece of dough around the crust of the bread. That's what forms the crust. And then when you bring it out, it'll crackle while it's cooling, and it just makes it really good. So we'll see how it works. One other thing, I never look at the recipe beyond a certain point anymore. I just noticed that it says 350. I guess you could do that. I've never done it. I always bake French bread at 400, 425. So for this, I heated it to 450, and I've just now cut it down to 400, and I'm giving it 30 minutes. So we'll see how it comes out. It'd be interesting to try it at 350. I just don't think it's going to make as good a crust. But, you know, this book is usually right, so I'm just stubborn because the way I did it before. We'll see. Okay, let's see how it did. Whew. Yeah, it looks pretty good. It's not the burst that I wanted, but it's not too bad. Let's see if I can pick this daggum thing up. Get it out of here. So you can see where the cuts were, it expanded. This one did pretty well, and that one. And this one did pretty well too. They burst, but I'll include some pictures where it's just an explosion. Look, it's just aesthetics. I think the crust is really good. It's very hard right there. It will soften over time, but you're gonna have some nice, good French bread with a nice, good crust on it. So send me a picture of what you end up with.